The era of 1941 to 1960 in America was a time of great stress with America being involved in a global war, World War II, and having to recover as a nation. World War II started in Europe between Germany, Poland, France, and Britain, and slowly moved throughout the world, recruiting more and more countries in the fight. The U.S. became involved when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The war was fought between the Axis powers, which was Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the Allied powers, which was Britain, the U.S., the Soviet Union, and France. The war ended when the Axis powers surrendered. The period of 1941 to 1960 was an era of great economic, political, and social change in America because it introduced new technological advancements that bettered the people's lives, it changed America's involvement in foreign affairs, and it gave women and minorities more social equality. New technologies arose during the time period between 1941 to 1960 which revolutionized the way the American people lived. The radio was groundbreaking in providing new modifications to America. During the 1950s, radio advertising rose by 35%, and the number of radio stations increased by 50%. Although the radio was already used prior to the era, new advancements in the radio industry allowed more business success in advertising, which provided people with more jobs. The radio started broadcasting things like the news, weather, music, and community issues as well, which gave way to the people having readability knowledge about current events, which gave them more pleasurable lives. Along with the radio, 500 new TV stations began to broadcast. As the television boomed, businesses as well advertised more. In fact, $2 billion of advertising by television was done in 1960. Americans now were able to see firsthand how the new technological products worked, be able to relax and watch pleasurable TV shows, and have more economic opportunity with a chance of becoming a famous actor or getting a job in the film industry, which provided them with a better life. Although the television did advance the American economy, critics object to its effects on children and its stereotypical portrayal of women and minorities. Although this may be the case, women and minorities were still given the economic opportunity to become wealthy and famous. The television gave several people great jobs, even if some people were portrayed stereotypically. The television also gave children entertainment over everything, and also took pressure off parents to entertain them themselves, which was beneficial to their family. Before World War II, America were extreme isolationists, concerned about their problems instead of global complications. From having to recover from the Great Depression and World War I economically, the country decided the best thing to do was to stay neutral. As President Roosevelt started to introduce the deal of the country being involved in the war, public outrage arose, with the people claiming the U.S. had been dragged in the war because of greedy bankers and arms dealers, so the U.S. too saw this as a reason to justify their neutrality. In fact, the U.S. were gaining economic gains from not being in the war because they were able to trade with allied countries for supplies. So it actually was a good thing. Then everything changed when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. The nation bonded together in revenge and decided war was the only option. In fact, after the surprise attack, isolationists, Senator Burton Wheeler proclaimed, "The only thing now to do is lick the hell out of them." America had transitioned from isolationism to militarism, which forced the country to claim as many weapons and men as they could for the battlefield. The U.S. came into the war very confident, painting a large target on them to neighboring countries. As time went on in the war, the U.S. joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization with 11 other countries as allies, who would protect each other with military aid. The membership gave the U.S. much political power in the world and strengthened the country's protection. It also made the U.S. have peace with several countries. Towards the end of World War II, Roosevelt and other nations' leaders established the United Nations, which resolved conflicts between nations. This dampened any comeback of isolationism. The U.S. had completely dissolved isolationism during the time period and emerged as a very powerful political nation with surrounding countries on their side. America saw war as inevitable as they left isolationism and saw that powerful dictators like Hitler was going to show up if they liked it or not. The U.S. had decided involvement of foreign affairs were necessary to have a peaceful nation. As World War II came to a close, women and minorities were given more social opportunities for equality. Before, women were looked upon as lesser than men. After the war, the perspective on women shifted as more and more people began to respect them. In fact, during the 1950s, the role of homemaker and mother was glorified in popular magazines, movies, and TV programs, such as Father Knows Best and The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Women were finally given recognition for their hard work. The role of a homemaker was looked up to in high regards, indicating that women were just as important as men in their society. Women were able to express themselves more on a global scale and become role models to young girls in their country, which they were restricted to beforehand. Music became cherished throughout the world, and with the already adoption of jazz from African Americans, new genres became influenced by it that was born. In actuality, African Americans' music had inspired the birth of rock and roll, and many of the genre's greatest performers were like Barry and Pennyman African Americans. African Americans during this time period had more cultural acceptance in their society. They were also given more societal equality, being able to play music to the world without restrictions. The country's appreciation of their talents also shows that African Americans were discriminated against less in their society. Some may say, although, that African Americans were still discriminated in their society. Even in their music, African American shows were mostly broadcast on separate stations. This may be the case, but African Americans were appreciated worldwide for their talents and were able to express themselves through music on their stations. Before the war, African Americans were rarely even on the television or radio and were instead restricted to express themselves. Here, African Americans were given more social equality that they previously did not have.